In the session, we're going to explain how to add and use the Record Thread Widget, which is a widget that is already used on the case updates thread on the sidebar. And in the session, as the example, we're going to add a notes record thread to the accounts record view. As you can see here, we're on a records for accounts, and I've added here a widget called a bottom widgets. This is the sidebar widgets for notes, where you can see the thread of all your notes, and you can add new notes. You can see here, it added new notes. If you want, you can add it. It's saved. And you can collapse and expand as you already saw. And this will keep a thread of all your notes, all the ones that are attached to this account. The information that you see here, this is the user that created that note, the assigned user in this case actually. This is the name, and this is the description or the notes. So this is the same information that you have on the history subpanel. So these notes here is just right here at the top, and you can add it directly without having to go to the other screen. As I said before, this is all done using a widget called the Record Thread, which is used in multiple places, including the case updates, the notifications, and some other places. Now, let's see how we can add this new widget to our accounts record view. So, on the codes, the first thing to note is that on core, there's this file here, which is the sidebar widgets, which includes an entry for bottom widgets and sidebar widgets. Please note that the widget that you can use on sidebar, you can also use on the bottom widgets. So they're interchangeable. You can use on one side or the other. You just have to keep in mind that some widgets might not display properly on the sidebar because they are meant to be on a wider space. That's the only thing you have to have in mind, but technically it's possible to change them from one side to the other, like we're doing with this widget here on the 4 notes. And you can add extra entries to this bottom widgets configuration, as you can see on modules, on your extensions folder. And let's see how we can do that. So on our extensions folder, default txt, config, modules, accounts, record view, bottom widget, I've added a notes.php. So this path here is just a guideline to help you structure your code and keep things clean. So this is for modules, for the accounts module, it's for the record view, as you know, and this bottom widget. So you have a folder that if you want to add multiple widgets, you can do it here. Now, first thing is that we need to do is to the base setup in order to extend the configurations or the Symfony container parameters. So you may need to add that base structure on our PHP file. As you can see here, we add the correct namespace, you use the container builder, add a static function, and so forth, the base setup. Then first step is to get the base definition for the bottom widgets, which by default is empty, as you already know, but we need to get that. From the bottom widgets, we need the module section. For that, the accounts, and then the widgets. And as you can see here, we are initializing it if it's not defined yet, which is our case. So modules exists, but account doesn't, and widgets also doesn't. Then we add to our widgets our definition for the record thread. And lastly, we will need to add it back. So we add the widgets back to accounts widgets, the accounts to the modules accounts, the modules back to bottom widgets, and set it back on the container. Now let's look a bit into the configurations that you can do using Record Thread. The concept of a record thread is not a table, that's why it's not called record thread, but it's a thread of records. So each of the entries that you saw before is managed separately. So we don't get the full list, we get a list and initialize each of its entries separately so they can be saved and changed separately. So for that, we need to add our type record thread to our widgets. We add a label that said notes. By doing this, we allow it to collapse, as you saw before. And then we have the options, which are, in our case, are the record thread specific options. This part here is base for any kind of widgets, either sidebar or bottom widgets. And here is the specific to record thread. So first thing we need to define is the module. In this case, we want to get the records from the nodes module. The second thing we're defining here is max list height set to 0. So in this case, you can add as many records as you wish, and you'll never see a scroll. It will keep going down. Okay, it will take all the space that it needs in order to show everything all the records that you've loaded. If you want it to have a scroll, like after 500 pixels to have a scroll, you can set here the number of pixels that you want to use as a threshold. The second thing, and this is very important, is to define the filters of the records that you want to get. Because if you don't define any filters, it's going to get all nodes that you have access to, regardless of the current module. So we need to filter it by the current module we are on, so the current account we are on. For that, you have, in this case, to define two things. One is the parent filters. The parent filter is filters that are grabbed from the parents. The parent in this case is the account. So we are defining a mapping saying that the parent ID of the nodes, this is a field on nodes, is going to be grabbed from the ID on the account. So this side is the parents, this side is the nodes. Okay, that's why it's called parent filters. They're grabbed from the parents. The other entry is static. Static, as the name says, is static. It's always the same value. In this case, we're defining parent type, which is for the field parent type. The operator we want to use on our filter is an equals, and the value is accounts. This will allow us to grab all the nodes that have parent type accounts, and the ID, the parent ID, is the current accounts. So it will only show the accounts for the current account records. Then you can define an order by and a sort order. And then we have two main areas. One is the item and then the creates. So what's this? The item will define how each of those entries is going to display, because this widget allows you to configure where to set the fields. It's very, very, very flexible. As you saw, this is the same widget that's used on the case updates and the same that's used on the notifications, that they look quite different from each other. That's why, because it's very, very configurable. So this here will define how and what's going to show on each of the individual items. And the create is the create area at the bottom, as you saw. Let's look first into the item. So you can add classes that are like a global class to the item. Then you have the layouts. The layout, you can set a header and a body. We're not using header, so let's collapse that. You have body, and this is everything that you were seeing on the screen was defined on the body. Lastly, you have the actions that you're going to use. We'll have to add as a placeholder for those actions, the one, the edit, the cancel that you saw before. So for that, you can define rows, and in this case, we have 2 rows. The first row, you can say if it's going to align. So this is vertical line, it's going to justify. This is using flex. Okay, so, if you look into Bootstrap flex, this is using those classes. Then you define the columns that you want to show. So we're displaying the assigned username. We're also displaying the name. And at the end, we're displaying the actions. As you can see here, it says that this is an action slot, which is going to use the actions that are defined at the end. Okay. Then there's multiple configurations you can do to hide or show the label if you want to show it on the top or in line. Multiple configurations that we're not going to cover now. And you can define classes and so forth, but we're not going to cover that now. I just wanted to note that there's lots of flexibility here. You can decide when to hide, if you want to hide if empty, and so forth. Then we have our other row, which is where we keep the description. And the same configurations you can play here, the justify, the classes. In this case, we're going to use the description fields. We want the label to display on the top, but we only want the label to show in your edit mode. This is all the behaviors that you were seeing there on the front end. let's look a bit into the actions. Actions, this is the actions that we want to show. So you saw edit, cancel, save, and delete. These actions follow the same standards for any other actions, record view actions, and so forth. It's the same standard, the same kinds of configuration that you can use. You can imagine each of these items as a micro record view that can change from edit to detail mode. So that's like a micro record view. And the actions behave the same. Then let's now look into the creates. So the create follows a pattern very, very similar to the item entry, but there's an important thing to note, which is the preset fields. So what are the preset fields? Are fields that you're going, apart from the ones that you're going to set on the layout, as you saw the subject and the note itself, you can inject other fields. This is useful for attaching this new note you're going to create to the current record. So in this case, onto the current accounts. Otherwise, it would not be linked and it wouldn't show on these widgets. For that, you have parent values. It follows a structure similar as we've used on filters. On the left side, we have the parent value. So this is the ID of the accounts, which is going to be set on the parent ID of the notes. And then in the static entry, we're going to say that the parent type is going to be accounts. So when you save, when you enter the subjects and the notes and you click on the submit button, these two values are also going to be set. And that's how we attach this node to the current accounts. Now, looking into the layout, which is similar to the one on the item. So we have two rows. First row, we just add the name as you saw before. And on the second row, you add the description. These configurations follow exactly the same pattern that you've seen before on the item. So justify, align the classes, and so forth. So after adding your configuration and tweaking it to be the way you want, the only thing left is to clear cache. This should be all that you need to do in order to configure the record threads on your account's bottom widgets area.